as we sing, Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus.
The name of the song is Say Amen. If you'd like to sing along, you can say amen. If I can get the paper to stay up here. We're all on a journey, we're called to walk by faith. There'll always be the mountains and the valleys in our way. But right here in this moment, may our strength be renewed as we recall what God has done and how we've seen Him move. If there's anybody here who's found Him faithful, anybody here who knows He's able, say amen. If there's anybody here who's seen His power, anybody here brought through the fire, say amen. Anybody here found joy in the middle of sorrow, peace in the storm, hope for tomorrow, and you've seen it time and time again, just say amen. the darkness, it's hard to see. So be bold and courageous and follow where He leads. Greater is the one who's in us than he who's in the world. So child of God, remember, the battle is the Lord's. If there's anybody here who's found Him faithful, anybody here who knows He's able, say amen. If there's anybody here who's seen His power, anybody here brought through the fire, say amen. Anybody here found joy in the middle of sorrow, peace in the storm, hope for tomorrow, and you've seen it time and time again, just say amen. Who can stand and testify of the greatness of God in our lives? If there's anybody here who's found Him faithful, anybody here who knows He's able, say amen.
Amen.
And if there's anybody here who's seen His power, anybody here brought through the fire, say amen. Anybody here found joy in the middle of sorrow, peace in the storm, hope for tomorrow? You've seen Him time and time again, just say amen. Just say amen. Just say amen.
Really glad to see Brandon Patterson's family here today. Lovely to have you all with us. Every time Brandon preaches for me, I always have somebody come and say, "Preacher, you better not go away very often because he's good enough to take the job, I tell you. Charlie, you need to watch out for him. Did a nice job. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I didn't know you played guitar, Doug. Shoot, that's good, bro. That's good. Appreciate you. Well, we have been in the midst of a Lenten series. The series is called, can you hear me now? And it's about discovering new old ways to hear from God. We have talked in the last 2 weeks about spiritual disciplines to take up during Lent. We've talked about study. We've talked about prayer. And today we talk about Sabbath and the joy of Sabbath and the opportunity that it gives us to draw near to the heart of God and to hear from our God. Looking forward to what God has to share with us through this time. So first, I'll ask that you'll pray with me and you'll pray for me. Would you pray? God, I ask that you would bless what I have prepared. And Lord, that you would transform this service into your time. I ask that if need be, what I prepared would go out the window so that your word could be heard even through a vessel like me. Come, Lord, and speak. Let your servants be listening. Amen. Our scripture reading comes to us today from the book of Exodus, chapter 20. We're going to be reading 8 through 11. And I invite you to follow along either in your own Bibles or up here on the screen with me. The word of the Lord. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. The seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals or any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that's in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Thanks be to God for the reading, for the understanding of His holy, blessed word. Friends, many of you know this passage comes to us from the Ten Commandments. God is giving the Israelites not just a to-do list of things they're supposed to be doing in their life. He's giving them a way of living, a way of operating, a way of living that shapes their identity as a people of God. This fourth commandment is all about the Sabbath. Now, Sabbath can be translated from the Hebrew as meaning rest. But Hebrew is a horrible, horrible language, especially if you're studying it. It's fascinating if you're studying it not for a grade, but if you're studying it in seminary, I wouldn't recommend it. Hebrew is dynamic, which means one word will mean one thing, and in another situation, in a different context, it means something completely different. Completely equal translation of the word Shabbat, rest. It can also mean to stop, to cease. Do you see where I'm going? To cease. And the Sabbath day, God tells His people to stop, to Shabbat, to cease their work, and instead fill that time with something different. At the risk of putting you to sleep, I'm going to give you a few statistics this morning. Here they are. You ready? 60% of Americans do not get as much sleep as their doctor recommends. 60%. 429 million. What's that? 429 million are the number of unused vacation days that Americans did not cash in last year. As it turns out, even when we're out of the office, many of us still work, to the point where most Americans, the majority, work an extra day a week after they get home, and that time is unpaid. Unpaid overtime. 40% of Americans check their work email on vacation, 38% check work email at the dinner table, and 50% check work emails from bed. Now, we've always been a culture that appreciates hard work, right? Some of you think I just work on Sundays. It's not really true. I like to let y'all think it is sometimes, but it's not really true. We like when our folks, when our friends, when our family is hard working, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Except when we have non-stop activity, non-stop work, well, there are side effects that come with that, and they're not always positive. For example, 40% of Americans are suffering from an anxiety disorder. 1 in 10 are on anti-anxiety or depressant medication, which is not a sin, but it's certainly pointing to where we are as a people. Is the world now more stressful than it's ever been? Maybe, maybe not. We have expectations of ourselves and our families that seems to be greater. Here's the scariest statistic for me. For women in their 30s and 40s, working age women, the number on antidepressants is actually now 1 in 4. 1 in 4. It says something about where we are as a people. Is this an anxiety problem? Or is this something else? Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a rest problem, a balance problem. It's a problem that is addressed in this commandment. And it's addressed in this commandment for the sake of our children. In other words, what you do will be replicated by those who are younger than you, your children and grandchildren. So the way that we practice the fourth commandment, Sabbath, is important. And you should know, I have not always done this well, including last week. I have not always done this well. When I was in Frankfurt, I was finishing my seminary education. I had a toddler son who I was trying to be an active participant in his life. I was partnered to a wife who was struggling with her health quite a bit. And to be honest, I was working 40 to 50 hours a week on top of all that. And at the end of the day, I had absolutely nothing left. I started getting sick a lot. It would be once a month at least where I would call in and I would tell my boss, I'm not going to be able to make it in today. I'm sick. I'm sick. I started having problems sleeping at night. Anxiety. I started developing an ulcer, which is what happens when you're not sleeping at night and then you're drinking a pot and a half of coffee to stay awake during the day, right? And I started, struggling with my health. I was put in the hospital for lack of caring for my diabetes probably 5 or 6 times in 2 years. My diet stunk. I worked too much. I didn't know how to slow down. And we were so loaded down with medical debt that we went years without taking a vacation. We couldn't afford it. I gotta tell you, I was not functioning at a very high level, needless to say. The second time that I had pneumonia in a year, my boss called me to his office, and the senior pastor of our church in Frankfurt set me down for one of those dad and me talks. You know, the one where you know you're in trouble and you're getting ready to get it. And a man that I love dearly told me something that I will never forget. He said, Jeff, God has given all of us 24 hours. 8 of that 24 hours is for rest. 8 of it is for work. And 8 of it is for you and your family. Son, once you break out of that mold, you're going to get yourself in trouble. And then he told me, please take care of yourself. I didn't want to hear that word, but I needed to hear that word. I needed it. I still do. I still do. I will remind you, who is receiving this commandment? It was the Israelites. They were coming out of slavery, just been delivered through the Red Sea. They were people who were slaves in Egypt. That's who's receiving this command. Friends, slaves don't get days off, okay? They don't. The people who received this command to Shabbat, these people were tired and beaten up and worn down. They were in need of refreshment. The Sabbath was and is good news to a people who are enslaved by work and activity. What did it mean to stop? It meant that you prepared your meals ahead of time so that you didn't have to cook. It meant that you got your laundry done before the Sabbath started. It meant that you didn't do any work around the house. It meant that you didn't say to your kids, would you go out there and muck those stalls because it's a mess. It meant that the people who worked for you did not work that day either, and neither did the stranger in town. It meant that you didn't shop. It meant everything shut down and stopped. And in its place, Israel was to fill that time with rest, with worship, with spending time with their God. This was a countercultural thing in that day, and it was countercultural for us too, right? It's countercultural in that day because it was an agrarian society. It was a farming culture, and it was not good land particularly. It was rocky, sandy soil. They worked sun up to sundown in that area, 7 days a week, and barely eked out a living. So when God tells them, one day out of the week, you will not work, obeying that was an act of trust. It was an act of obedience. It required that they stop long enough to remember that their work and energy is not what kept the barns full and plenty of vegetables in the shed. Their work and energy was not what kept the world spinning. And the way it happened is stopping. They got the opportunity to worship the one who did keep the world spinning. The God that they served would provide for them, would give them an abundance so that they could enjoy Sabbath as a gift. It required that they stop long enough to worship the God who kept the world spinning. This, friends, I tell you, the faithful practice of Sabbath, it required for the Israelites and it requires for us a new estimation of who we are and what we are here put on this earth for. Hear me, church. You are more than what you do. You are more than the people who depend on you, and you are more than what you are able to produce. You and I are the beloved children of God. And we are made for freedom. We are made for God's delight. Mike Yaconelli, in his book, Dangerous Wonder, tells about a time in his life when busyness was threatening his very soul. He, at the urging of some friends, decided to do a spiritual retreat that was held at Large Community. That's an in-home treatment area, in-home treatment facility for people who are mentally and physically handicapped up in Canada. It is famous for one reason and one reason only. A very popular spiritual teacher named Henry Nouwen, a Catholic priest and writer, moved to L'Arche and was in residence there for many years. So Mike was really excited. Nouwen was one of his favorite writers and authors and speakers, and he was really excited to go and be refreshed. In the introductory time, Mike just admitted to the group, listen, I'm here because I'm burnt out, because I'm worn out, and because I don't have anything left to give. I'm tired, and I'm busy, too busy. He was really looking forward to the first session. He knew in his mind and in his heart that Nouwen was going to get up and just blow their socks off with a very intelligent and thought-provoking first lecture. And in fact, what actually happened was Nouwen got up and talked about the logistics of the week and how it was all going to go. From breakfast to cleaning up the shower area. Boring. It was boring. It was not exciting. It was not what he expected. And by the time that first session ended, Mike said he was already ready to leave, looking at his watch, frustrated, wanting to go back to his room to work on a few things that he had brought to work on while he was here on his spiritual retreat for Sabbath. Mike says just as he got up to leave the circle, he was confronted by a member of the Large Community. The man, his name was Robert, and Robert was in his 40s, and he looked normal, but he had a vocabulary of only a couple hundred words. And Robert came up to Mike, and he got right up in Mike's spiritual space, physical space. He got right up in the land of halitosis, folks. Right up, way too close for him. And he asked Mike, with his limited vocabulary, a question. Robert said, Mike, busy? And Mike said, yes, Robert, I'm busy. And Robert said, Mike, too busy? And Mike said, yes, Robert, I'm too busy. Mike says that he will never forget what happened next. Because as close as they were, their noses just inches apart, Robert stepped closer and asked with a look of grave concern in his eyes, why, Mike? Why? Robert had a very, very low vocabulary, okay? But even with his limited facilities, Robert could see that Mike needed some help. He had the courage to ask Mike what Mike was never going to consider on his own. Why was he so busy? Why was his schedule full from sun up to sundown? Why was his anxiety sky high? He asked him the question, why? Mike says he spent the next year of his life trying to answer that question. Friends, some of you here today need to answer that question. Why are you so busy? Where does choice fit into the way that our schedules fill up? Why do we have item after item after item in our calendars Why is our life filled to capacity with activities? Aren't you and I made for more than work? Isn't that what the commandments assure us of? Why have we eliminated silence from our life? Are we being driven by our own insecurities? On some level, are we who are so busy doing all this good, are we trying to earn the love of a Father who's already given it? Why? Why? Look at your schedule and ask that question. Now, I'm going to suggest to you, friends, that there'll never be room to answer that question unless you're willing to stop. Unless you're willing to still yourself for the God who speaks and remakes us in our silence. Most Jewish scholars do not believe that Exodus chapter 20 was the first command of Sabbath. In fact, it's referenced here in the Ten Commandments that the first practice of Sabbath was seen in Genesis 2. God has created perfectly the world as it should be. Days 1 through 6 in Genesis chapter 1. We get to Genesis chapter 2, and the seventh day, what does God do? He rests. He rests. He declares Shabbat, Sabbath, rest, and He makes that day holy. The question I've always had that I still haven't managed to answer completely is why in the world would the God of the universe, the all-powerful, most high God of angel armies, need to rest? God doesn't need any more energy or any more strength. God doesn't need space for reflection. Why does God carve out that time in our life? Two reasons, I think. Number one, it's not described in Genesis 2, but I think that God was delighting in what He had made. I think God sits back, and I think He takes in the beauty of the lilies. I think He takes in the wonder and the songs of the birds. I think He sits back and listens as the waves crashing into the shores give Him a round of applause. I think that God sat back and enjoyed the work He had done. So it would only make sense that you and I should be no different or no better than God. That we would need to do that as well. To make space in our lives to delight in the work of the Master. Psalm 37 says it better than I could. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land, enjoy its safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to God. Trust in Him, and He will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Be still. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. God has given us the Sabbath day to take delight, to stop and consider the work of His hands and the work of His goodness in our own lives. It sets up the rest of our week for something better, doesn't it? When we're able to stop and do that. The second reason I think He carves out time on the Sabbath is because I think God wants us to understand the holiness of time. The holiness of time. How are we supposed to hear God speaking? Because He whispers. How are we supposed to hear God speaking if we don't stop chasing what we chase the rest of the week and the rest of our days? We had to cancel church services in January, and there were feet of snow. We're not talking like a sprinkling. There were feet. The parking lot was, it was a nightmare. We weren't going to be able to get crew in before Sunday, and I pretty well knew we were going to have to cancel church. I had not made the call, but I knew, and this is Saturday afternoon, and I told you guys, but Jonah told me, Dad, don't cancel church. Don't cancel church. because when I miss church on Sunday, it messes up the rest of my week. And that is the way that I think we're supposed to operate. From the mouth of goofballs, right? That's the way we're supposed to operate. This practice of worship, it's practice. It's practice for us to hear from God for the rest of the week, because God doesn't stop speaking on Sunday mornings. He just requires that we tune our hearts, that we prepare our ears and our eyes to hear and see from Him. When we don't have that practice, it's harder to hear from Him on a day-to-day basis. That discipline of keeping the Sabbath has a way of shaping how we hear from God the rest of the week. It has a way of shaping, well, our ministry and our life from sun up to sundown. David Siemens tells the story of his first appointment, or early appointment in his ministry. He was sent as a missionary to work as a district superintendent to a bunch of different churches, Methodist churches in India. It was a good appointment for him. He was young and energetic, and I'll just tell you, stupid. He was ready to go and do this big work that God had told him to do there in India. You can imagine his frustration when he moves to town, and the first thing that happens is, well, it's just in time for monsoon season. 53 consecutive days of rain. And I'm not talking like pitter, pitter, patter. I'm talking about rain, like God meant it. Rain. Monsoon. He could go nowhere. He could do absolutely nothing. He was stuck. There was flooding everywhere. David knew practically no one in that country. And his opening little couple months there were the monsoon season. And he couldn't even get out of the house. He couldn't visit his churches. He couldn't do the job that God had sent him there to do. Well, around day 40, David had had enough. And he erupted on God in his prayer and saying, Lord, I don't know how you want me to do this job if it keeps on raining. God, what do you expect me to do? What am I supposed to do now, Lord, because I'm sick of waiting? And he says he heard from God in prayer clearer than he ever had in his entire life. And this is what he says God told him. David, you be responsible for the depth of your ministry. I'll be responsible for the breadth of your ministry. Church, you be responsible for the depth. God will be responsible for the breadth. Okay? Our job is to hear from God. Our job is to center ourselves in His strength, in His will for our lives. Our job is to center ourselves in Him. When that happens, the breadth is never a problem. The world that we're living in calls us to more and more and more activity. Thankfully, you are and I are not called by the world. We are called by God, and God tells us, go deeper. Go deeper. Rest in my presence. Make room for God to speak to you this week, church. And see how He'll bless you. See how He'll speak. You pray for me. God, we ask that you would create room to speak in us. As we sing to you in this final song, we ask that you will give birth to something new in us. A desire to live in and out of your presence. So come, Lord, and speak to your people. Invite the band to come.